friends. So I just want to put that as the background, but I can't speak for them. But what I can just do is tell you a bit about what we do. This diocese is not an old diocese, only founded in 1877, but with a very old foundation in our cathedral. Covers, of course, Hertfordshire, Bedfordshire, the unitary authority of Luton and parts of Barnet. So although I spend probably about 2/3 of my time in Hertfordshire, a considerable amount of my time is spent elsewhere. And just to give you some stats, we have 313 paid clergy, 50 self-supporting clergy. There'll be people who've got a day job, including several who have professorial chairs in universities and so on, and others are one person who works on the shop floor in Vauxhall, in Luton. We have over 240 readers. Those are people who are authorized, trained and authorized to preach and lead services and indeed take funerals. They're a huge and valuable asset. And then we have almost 230 active retired clergy. There's, in the diocese, there's over 400 churches, and they're divided into 20 deaneries. On the education front, we have 138 Church of England schools, so we have more than 30,000 pupils in those schools, and there are more than 12 independent schools with church foundations. And then in terms of some of what we do, we also offer a service because we have over 200 halls. You'll be aware that many community facilities are being closed by local authorities because they're expensive to run. So we see this as a really important offer. And normally there'll be places for playgroups and sports clubs and elderly lunches and so on. Lots of different things going on. And then in terms of community engagement, it's not just, although most of it's centered in our churches, of course, we're out there in many different places. So we have a wide range of chaplains. Actually, there's something like 130 people who are working in some form of chaplaincy across the diocese, not all full-time. So they'll be at the airport, at the universities, hospitals, hospices, fire stations, police centres, youth centre, sports, and we even have rural agricultural chaplains trying to relate to our rural communities. Over 30 paid youth and family workers. So we actually offer more professional youth and children's work than the county council does. And that, as with all of this, of course, is paid by volunteers. We don't get any government money. Of course, the whole thing is funded by the most extraordinary generosity of people in our parishes. And then we have a number of voluntary schemes, typically known as street pastors, working in town centres in the night economy. And you'll find they're out supporting the police in their work. And you may have come across them. It's fascinating to go and spend an evening with them, working up till midnight and so on as they're out and about. And then there's a whole lot of other stuff to do with issues like environment, which of course has gone right up the agenda for us as it has for everyone. The Church of England has made a commitment to carbon neutrality by 2030. If I'm honest with you, I don't know how we're going to deliver it when you think about our drafty medieval churches. But anyway, we've set our hand to it. We have a dedicated environmental officer working with us. Large numbers of our churchyards are now being looked after in more ecologically friendly ways, which sometimes is applauded and sometimes deplored by people, but there we go. We're working with the Eco Church Initiative and lots of work with young people, which is very encouraging. And they're absolutely chasing us and hounding us and wanting us to move much faster with all that raw energy you get from young people. And then if I just continue for a bit on some of the stuff we're doing, let me just mention one or two things to do with pandemic responses. Actually, one of the things early on that happened was we were asked by the NHS to set up a hotline because the worry was so many people may die in hospital and the staff simply couldn't cope. Would we have extra chaplains available? And in fact, incidentally, we've not made a big thing of this, but we've had to turn one of our churches into a temporary mortuary, simply because the local undertakers cannot could not cope with how to store bodies. And we've just tried to use our resources to help local businesses and solve problems. There's literally dozens of parish pantries and food bank projects. Indeed, one of the fascinating things was a number of churches spontaneously started collecting food and putting it in church porches. So this was very informal, particularly early on, and saying to people, just come and if you haven't got food, just come and help yourselves. And actually that's been hugely appreciated and not very well known. We continue our involvement with a number of credit unions, formal credit unions, but also debt advice centres, for example, in Ware. We've have a programme of training of clergy because of emerging mental health issues. And we're all aware that I think it's probably true to say most of us have found this pretty difficult. I can tell you I've found this last haul since Christmas really tough going. And then we've been doing huge amounts of stuff, like so many organisations. We had a week's notice to try and get 400 churches online with their worship. We've had to get loads of staff out and about as best we could in a COVID secure way to get IT equipment and also trying to work on how do we get people, particularly our elderly people, online. Many churches said, oh, they'll never do it. I have to say, it's been fascinating. The vast majority of older people are now so media tech, you wouldn't believe it. It's been really impressive how, despite all the pain and anguish of this pandemic, this has absolutely opened up a whole new world. And our churches, in some ways, only about a third of them are currently offering worship in person. Most of them are still online. It's very interesting how this has included people who were disabled, caring for someone at home and couldn't come out. And it's been quite a lesson to us about how we'd lost touch with some people who wanted to be part of us but couldn't physically come and now can. So yeah, been a big learning project. And then just some of the broader things before I stop, and we'll just take questions and comments and so on. It's quite interesting that when you ask parishes how much they give away to charities, that's after they've raised the money to pay for the building and pay for themselves. I mean, this diocese in 2019, just over £2 million was given away. So we're looking after 400 buildings, of which 2/3 are medieval, which are hugely costly. And we would never have chosen to have them, but we've been granted custodianship of them, which is a great opportunity, but hugely complicated. And on top of that, our churches have given away 2 million. And just this last week, the vicar of Bishop Stortford said to me, well, we normally give away about 12,000, but this year we've given 20 because people, this is a rainy day. People are saying we need help. So we've had an extra whip round, and this is just one of 400 churches, which I just thought was so interesting. He just mentioned it in passing. I have my own harvest appeal each year. We raise about 70,000. Amazingly, last year it held up. I have to say, like every other organisation, we're taking a big financial hit at the moment, but the generosity continues to be extraordinary, really has. And I think although people, you know, a lot of us have been grumpy at times and have felt negative, actually what has been quite extraordinary is the way that so many people have thought this is the moment where I've got to stand up and make a difference. And I just think we've got to find ways to tell that story much, much more loudly. And I'm trying to do that. I hope you can do that. And then the final thing I just want to say on this screen is that we have links with overseas dioceses. It sounds wonderful being linked with the Caribbean. Actually, I have to say it's the Windward Islands. So we don't have a lot to do with the really posh holiday destinations. We're dealing with places that have suffered economically. And we have a number of international links also with Guyana and Belize. And that's been fascinating. And indeed, another area that's opened up is some work that Bishop Michael of Hertford is doing, which is online meetings where we're working, his work of, he was an international epidemiologist working with the Democratic Republic of Congo in terms of producing teaching materials to prevent the spread of Ebola. And it's been translated into their local language and into French. And we found that we can be doing some of this education online with our partners in Africa, for example. Now, that I think is enough of me just rabbiting on. And I think what would be useful is let's just open up a conversation. Either do raise if you want to and ask questions, or if you want to make suggestions or comments, please, I would just love to have a really good exchange with you. So we're now going to have that moment of embarrassed silence where nobody asks a question, and I'm just going to eyeball you all.
Alan, thank you very much indeed. I was making notes on things that I probably should have known about, but didn't. A lot of numbers there. I did remember after a couple of minutes to press the recording button, so hopefully we'll be able to go back through them. And perhaps Andy might be prepared to send us your PowerPoint presentation if you're happy. Some useful information there.
Certainly do that, yes, of course.
So open up to the floor. I will try, if you can just sort of wave a hand or do whatever, I will try and see anybody. I've got two screens to flick through. So Nick, I see Nick Halsey first.
Thanks very much, Robert. Bishop, you know there are large developments proposed around Hemel Hempstead and north of Harlow. Has the church got plans for building new church buildings and establishing new parishes in these areas?
The answer is each large development is being looked at differently. By and large, our first port of call isn't to immediately build a new church building. We're looking to get a church school wherever we can and get a multi-purpose building. Because the secret first is you've got to develop a congregation which has people and energy and, putting it bluntly, want to financially support a local church. So what we're doing at the moment is we do have a number of new congregations which have been set up. The archdeacons are very closely in touch with the huge developments around the north of Luton, for example. We're working ecumenically with our other partners. We don't tend to go it alone. And so that's a very active part of the work. And indeed, if Robert Cecil was here, I've been up to look at where they're looking to possibly develop. I can see Charles, I've suddenly noticed Charles, yes. Our discussions there have been the same about how we can develop a Christian presence as these developments go forward.
Thank you.
Anybody else going to stick their hand up? Let me just flick through both pages. Marion. You are muted, Marion, I'm afraid.
Sorry, classic mistake. Thank you very much, Alan, for all of that. That's really good to hear, and thank you for coming. I guess one of the thoughts I've been thinking around is where churches, obviously, as you've outlined, have had to make significant changes during this period for quite some time now. How do you see church evolving in the light of what people have learned, their new experiences with technology, etc., etc., and how is the central diocese sort of helping to support clergy as they have to wrestle with some of those big decisions, really?
Well, you're absolutely right. And it is quite extraordinary, the number of clergy who report they've had people logging into their worship from Australia, Germany, Japan, and so on. It has opened up a whole new world. A couple of things. First of all, I think the expectations have changed. When I book into a hotel now, and I'm booking it online, I click must have free Wi-Fi in every room. I don't even consider a hotel that doesn't have Wi-Fi any longer. I think every funeral and wedding, people are going to want to be able to live stream. This is going to be easy in our big urban churches, profoundly difficult in those remote rural communities where there's still not a decent broadband. So the question of digital access for us as a county, I think is a really, really important thing. If people are going to be working from home, so I've been banging away at this in Parliament for some while. You know, access to good, high quality broadband, as all our farmers know, is just absolutely standard, and we've got to work on how that's rolled out. Unfortunately, the government's cut some of its funding it had promised. It is, of course, possible for local groups to get together and sometimes solve problems. And I think it might be one of the things that could come out of this might be to say, are there ways that we can work together? In Norfolk, there's a company being set up called Spire, which is bouncing signals from spires right up through the county. And actually, some of us might be able to help broker some meetings with local councillors and landowners and think about what we can do. Sorry, I've gone off piste a bit there, Marion.
That's right.
So I think we're going to need to try and do two things to stay to get back in person. I don't personally think virtual church is going to survive in the long run. I think we're made for face-to-face contact. I think almost in every aspect of life that's going to matter. But there will be times when we can very quickly have the odd meeting online. We're all just clicking on so easily now. And I think, as I say, there are people who, for all sorts of reasons, have been excluded. And we want to try and find ways to include them now. So huge challenge if you're a vicar with 4 rural churches. Can we have a permanent camera set up, installed, so you can flick it on with the sound system, you know, as you go in, and it won't be very sophisticated, but those are the sorts of questions we're trying to look at, whether we can help fund that and so on.
Thank you.
Next, I mean, if I can ask something, Alan, carrying on from that, 2 weeks ago, the Lord Lieutenants Association were very privileged to have a Zoom meeting with the Archbishop of Canterbury. And one thing he was expressing was his concern about the numbers dropping off. And he quoted a figure from memory, I think he said about 200,000 expected to lose by the end of this year. Is that a concern generally across the board, or is that something specific to certain areas?
Well, the trouble is, to be honest, we don't know. I mean, that's the real question. I mean, clearly, we've been closed for nearly a year, and in that time a number of people have simply died. You know, I mean, you know, like every organization, you are, putting it rather crudely, recruiting at any one point, and we've had hardly any confirmations in the past year. It's interesting, isn't it? Is this glass half full or half empty? Because people say things like, oh, they've got out of the habit of turning up at church, to which I say, well, they've got out of the habit of going to the golf course or going out for lunch on Mondays or going to the gym. There's a sense in which everything's being thrown up in the air and everybody's going to be positioning themselves, whether it's restaurants or pubs or whatever, trying to see this as an opportunity. So my line on it has been, let's just get out there in our communities. Let's listen to what people are trying to do. Say, are there ways we can work together? And let's see what happens. Because you as a group know better than any the extraordinary level of charitable volunteering work going on. We had more volunteers early on in the pandemic than we could cope with. The number of people who were complaining they'd volunteered, but nobody wanted to use them. So I think both in terms of we've had extraordinary interest online, particularly from young people, which has been very heartening. Many more people taking up our daily messages and joining in daily prayers. There's been a resurgence online of people going to Book of Common Prayer worship, possibly because people, want roots, and sadly they don't often turn up so much in church for it, but they've been turning up online. You may know the Dean of Canterbury has become a bit of a digital sensation because he sits in his garden reading morning prayer and gives a little homily, and every morning several thousand people, and he sits there and his cats wander around and he has his cup of tea, and it's all very sort of Church of England. So I think there's huge opportunities, and my question would be, what are the opportunities? What are the things that we need to do as we're coming out of this? I mean, how can we reset things for our county? What sort of communities do we want to rebuild? We've had a wonderful coming together. Just in my own road here, we've talked to each other a way we haven't for years. So I think there's a big question, if we're ready for it, about how we emerge together with all sorts of other groups of people of goodwill trying to work for the common good.
Absolutely. Lionel, and then I see Sally after that, and Harry as well.
Thank you, Robert, and Bishop. Almost hello, Bishop. You almost answered the question I was going to ask, actually, about whether indeed you had seen any difference, one way or the other, engagement, non-engagement with your young people. I think just now you mentioned that you'd seen a slight increase, or at least something about engagement with young people. I was just wondering if you could expand a bit on that part of things, because that's pretty dear to my heart as well.
Absolutely. I think what's interesting is what we've found isn't working is after school Zoom meetings, which is sort of like church youth clubs or study groups or whatever. Our experience at the moment is our young people are totally zoomed out. They're fed up to the back teeth with staring into a screen. What is working is some of the individual contact where we have, for example, some of our churches will be sending to their young people texts every day, suggestions, for example, during Lent, of things you can do each day. And we've seen a much bigger uptake of that sort of idea. So it's very patchy. Our traditional youth groups have really struggled. There's no doubt about it. Our Sunday schools have struggled. Parents are tired. And as for our wonderful school teachers, I mean, they just are at the end of their tether, is my experience. I mean, they're doing an amazing job, and every time the government announces they're going to keep offering classes during the summer holidays, I just can hear the squeals of pain and exhaustion. It's like our medical folk, our NHS. So very mixed, Lionel, very mixed.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sally, I think Sally was next.
Thank you, Robert. Hello there, Bishop. Slightly going back to your the volunteers, the amount of work people have done, the amount of money people have given, and the amount of commitment people have given. I hadn't come across your expression parish pantries before. With my work with the HCF, there's been an enormous amount of use of the word food bank, which I assume must be the same thing. And the things we've been noticing is that lots of people are doing a similar sort of thing, and perhaps in the future, you use the word merging. This is something that might happen in the charitable sector as well, of charities merging when they are doing the same work and therefore avoiding duplication. And I wondered if you are aware in the diocese of, I suppose, any joined up thinking on this.
Well, Sally, you're absolutely right, and it's a brilliant question. And in fact, the food pantries, I mean, simply emerged. We didn't plan them. And of course, my really enterprising clergy, because it was decided to give a lead, and if I can talk to you confidentially, I didn't agree with locking our churches. I was very vocally saying, I think it's one thing to say we're not going to have public worship, but to say the clergy can't go into their church. But anyway, I've made my position clear on that. I think that was a mistake. But of course, you were allowed to run a food bank. So a number of my clergy simply said, oh, yes, well, of course, we're not going to have any service, anything. Oh, by the way, we've declared our church a food bank now. So Flamstead became a food bank. It was open for the whole of the early stage. We have no evidence that any infections were passed on. They were hyper careful. You had to do everything you needed to do, and masks and so on. So I didn't subvert it. I mean, that's what they did. As all good concerned people, they just simply got on and did it. And I didn't want to make any. I didn't want to get in their way. I think a bigger issue you're addressing, though, is the whole question of charities. I think some charities are going to go under. I think often they've been set up by somebody who's passionate, who runs it from their back room, and it's their baby. And my experience of trying to bring small charities together is usually pretty painful. Often it's run on the lines of the person who founded it. And sometimes we find ourselves in a position where if it's going to survive, we've got to get a management structure in and get all the policies in, and it's painful. But I think that's definitely something we need to encourage people to explore as we come out. Is there a better way of doing it? Can we bring together, you know, we had 2 HIV charities here in St Albans and one club. We don't need 2 here. I mean, they're all wonderful people doing great stuff. But, you know, so I think if we can broker some of that, I think I'd be very helpful.
Thank you. Harry Bott, I think, was next.
Yes, there's been quite a lot of adverse publicity in the press recently saying that the church is very top heavy and there are not enough people there out in the field. Bannerman in the Times said that the Diocese of Chelmsford is offering a salary of between 85 and 90,000 a year for a new chief executive, yet at the same time will be cutting 61 parish clergy posts by the end of the year. Now, in my view, that is totally the wrong way round. Could you comment on that, please?
I'd be very happy to comment. I'm just aware Fergus is here, who I think actually just lives across in the Diocese of Chelmsford. The first thing I want to say to you all, isn't it good that we're in the Diocese of St Albans, because it's quite different here. I think, I mean, Harry, if I can be serious for a moment, in my time, we've increased the number of parochial clergy on the ground. You just need to hear that. We've actually increased the number of clergy on the ground, and that's because of extraordinary generosity. But there is no doubt that as pensions become more costly, housing is very costly. You know, this is the pinch point. 90% of our income and expenditure goes on our clergy in the parishes. And just below your little picture, I can see Richard, who knows all about this because he's been so involved with our fairly modest investments in land, but he's made a huge impact in helping them contribute more. I do also have to say, though, that of course the Diocesan Secretary is a company secretary. We're a company of, you know, we've got turnover over £14 million a year, and if we offer someone that job at £25,000, we're not going to get a good deal. So there's a real issue. And you need to know the people who get paid most in this diocese, so the Diocesan Secretary, the company secretary, and our Director of Education, who's overseeing 130, they get paid far more than I do. And it is quite a difficult issue. And those of you that are in business know, if you're not careful, actually, you will not get the level of competence. Now, that doesn't sound very convincing if you're, you know, Mrs. Higginbottom, who goes to 8 o'clock at St. Winifred's and puts her £5 or £10 in the collection. But there's a sort of a reality that with some of the jobs we do have to you know, remunerate to get someone of real skill and experience for what we want. But can I assure you, in this diocese, I keep getting asked this, we are absolutely committed that the thing stands or falls on the parishes, the schools and the chaplaincies, the grassroots stuff. So I just want to underline that, please. That is what I'm committed to. As for example, in teaching, you want everything to go into the classroom to really deliver good teaching. It's all local is what we're about.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that, but I wonder if that's the case in all dioceses?
No, I don't think we are in a much better place than some other dioceses financially. We've had an extraordinary number, and in fact, some of you are deeply involved in this, who've helped us really ask some very, very tough questions. So some of our committees will start and finish in prayer, but they quickly get into talk of sweating the assets and looking at maximising returns. And I'm very glad to bring those two things together, a sense in which we really do look to God and trust God, but we ask some extremely hard questions about running on a financial front a very, very tight ship. Now, anybody will know in a big organisation, you can always pick things that somebody doesn't like some aspect of. But we've been combing through everything over the last year, asking if we're using our resources in the very best and most productive way. So certainly here we're straining everything we've got to do that.
Thank you. Anybody, any further questions? Richard Playdell.
You're muted.
You're muted, Richard.
Right, that better?
That's it.
Good afternoon, Alan.
Richard.
You said that you didn't think that virtual services will carry on except for special events, and you may well be right, but that won't apply to all services everywhere. Do you think this is going to put pressure on parishes and, if I can use such management speak, as underperforming vicars? But perhaps a more practical or less contentious thing would be, if you love church music, for example, you would tune in to the building behind you, where the music is sublime, as opposed to your parish church, which may have got a rather dodgy organ and perhaps a rather dodgy organist and a few people singing out of tune. I would include myself in that, incidentally. So I think there could be, you could face problems of change, and I wonder how you're going to address that if it happens.
Well, no, and actually, if I can just clarify, I think what I don't think is likely to sustain is people who are going to come to faith, join a church, and only ever meet online. I don't think there's any. We've tried it. We've tried virtual churches over a number of years. All these young, bright, techie people, because the problem is, it's all very well until you get COVID and you want somebody to bring some food round, and they live in Afghanistan or somewhere. You know, there's something about the local. And in fact, when I was talking about, is it possible to have a sort of a set camera in a church? Is I think actually a lot of our churches, and some were doing it before COVID, mind. We've had a number of churches that have had their main Sunday worship streamed live for a number of years. Not many, but some of them have done that quite regularly. So it's going to emerge, and we don't know where it's going to go. And I agree, it's going to give people much more choice. So those that want to go to the cathedral, can do it virtually. The cathedral will certainly be continuing. They've already installed all the equipment, so it will always be streamed live. Some of our more remote churches are having to record the service and then put it online. So it's quite complex, actually. We're still struggling, and sometimes the quality isn't good. And in a very visual age where you can flick through so many TV channels, a grainy picture in half light of St. Bartholomew's the Lesser or something doesn't immediately appeal. So we've got to up our game.
Lionel, I think, and then I see Fergus. Yes.
I seem to be asking questions that get touched on just before I ask them, Bishop. So just to expand on that, because my question was going to be, we've all seen the quite beautiful work that's been done on the cathedral recently, both in terms of the frontage and then the very good extension. Have you seen an increase in interest in people coming into the facility because of those modernizations and changes? It's the first question. And then the second question is, we talk about the new technology. I think it's one thing to stream services. It's perhaps another thing to go further and allow for interaction on a non-virtual basis coming the other way, where people who are not in the building might actually be projected in. What's your thoughts about that?
Well, firstly about the cathedral, what's interesting is with the opening in the cathedral, I mean, last year before lockdown, the numbers just went through the roof. It was absolutely wonderful. And we're still seeing a large footfall. And it's something we really want. We want it to be, it belongs to the people. We want them in. We've just got to do it safely. After Christmas, we realized we couldn't safely handle the numbers. And we had to start limiting, firstly with tickets, and now it's gone back virtual. We're going to be opening up for Easter. Of course, there's worship every day you can go to, people gather every morning at 8 and so on. But on a Sunday, it's a wonderful problem. We just can't cope with the huge numbers in a way that we can guarantee safety. So every church is asked to do a proper risk assessment, work out how many they can safely handle. And if they can do that, following all the protocols, they can still have worship. And as I said, about a third are still doing that, particularly in more remote areas where there's very little COVID. In terms of the interactive worship, that is such a good question. I don't know what the answer is. I mean, Lionel, come and help us. You're a pro in this sort of area. I think that's the problem for me. Is the difference between going down to town to see a play at the National, or go and see an opera at the Garden, or watching it on television. There's just something that's so profoundly different when you've planned it, you've dressed up, you've got down there, you've had some supper, you've gone into the theatre and you wait. Compared with, you wander with your baked beans on toast and sit in front of the television. If the phone goes, you pick it up and you wander off. And it's a totally different experience. And I think that's what worship should be. It should take us somewhere that we've not been, take us into the presence of God, either through a profound sense of corporate identity and immanence, to use the technical word, or the great sense of transcendence when you hear the choir soaring through the cathedral. And I think it's my experience is I don't get caught up in the same way online when the doorbell's going and so on. So I think it's got its place, and it's been marvelous during this last year. Without it, I don't know what we would have done, but yeah.
Fergus.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Bishop. Alan, I was just thinking that we're slowly going to come out of this, and COVID-19, I hope, will just become another flu that we get a jab for on a regular basis. But of course, there's been a huge amount of sorrow and loss for people. And I was just thinking whether the church is going to hold some sort of memorial service, and that could be reflected in every church throughout the land, where people could go and have a service just to mourn all those people that were lost. Because I think that could begin to pull people together back to church, and could sort of set us off on the right track again. Because I think people are looking to the church for guidance and love and all the good things about the church, and they've missed it. And it might be a good thing that we could do.
We've been talking at great depth about precisely this issue, Fergus, you're right. And of course, a year ago, when we first had lockdown, people were dying. We were saying to them very naively, well, of course, we can have a memorial for X or Y in 3 months' time. And here we are 12 months later, and we've not had the memorials. I mean, there is so much grief that's not been resolved.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting question. So one of the discussions that's been going on is, should we be doing something on the anniversary of the lockdown, which of course is 2.5 weeks' time? And generally the feeling was, actually at this point, to do lots of grieving is not where most people are at, that actually a lot of people are just holding on with grim life as we're opening up and we're all getting our vaccinations. And that particularly younger generation are just desperate to look forward. Where we've got to is the cathedral is going to have a county-wide service. I think it's on the, I don't know, I'm not very good at looking up my calendar at the same time, but let me just see if I can find it. I think it's around Sunday the 6th or 8th of November in the afternoon, where we will it's Robert, we haven't even got around to inviting you. I'm just telling you, this is, I don't think, literally, I was talking yesterday about it with them. And we'll be looking to see whether we can get everybody and St. John Ambulance and schools and so on, if we're allowed to have 1,000 plus in the cathedral at that stage.
Yeah.
And my view at the moment is we start putting these things in on the hope that this vaccine is going to do the trick. But if we get variations, who knows? But you're absolutely right. And then I think we need to allow local churches to depending on their area, to have other acts. Of course, we normally do that around All Souls Day anyway.
Yeah.
That's a pretty regular thing. Everybody who's had a funeral in the parish will have been invited to an All Souls, and their names are read out, and people come forward and light a candle or place something on the altar. You know, there's a lot of that sort of stuff goes on. But I think we need to develop it. And again, if you've got any ideas, do let us know. We're just trying to listen what's going to be the right thing at the moment.
Yeah. Thank you.
Keith McAdam.
Hello, Bishop Allen. I wanted to ask or comment on your earlier observation that during this last year, so much voluntary work has come in largely from those who are not so much at danger from the virus, so the younger people. These are young families, and it's been an astounding movement of young people contributing in the community. And I just wonder whether there's an effort to try and find out from them, what is it that makes them part of that community and might make them, bring them back to the church, which many of them have served in the past. But asking the question of relevance of modern liturgy and so on, and how perhaps change can happen going forward.
Keith, that's such a good question. Of course, the complexity from my point of view is what's interesting is we've got examples of almost every style of church which bucks the trend. So we have the largest youth congregation in the country down at Soul Survivor in Watford, where 1,000 young people typically will be going into what is a set of warehouses with music and bands and flashing lights. They come from all around the area. It's an extraordinarily engaged congregation. It's sponsoring work amongst people on drugs, homelessness. They have a team of women working amongst prostitutes. I mean, it's the most incredible piece of work. So that's right at one end. You would hardly recognize it as Church of England. At the other end, we've got some of our churches in the more Catholic tradition, which are a bit like some old-fashioned Roman Catholic churches in terms of their ritual and their formality. So some of those have got, young families in. It's not that all young people want modern worship. It's quite interesting. As I said earlier, there's been an extraordinary online resurgence of Book of Common Prayer. And we don't quite know why. As I hinted, I suspect it's about people touching the familiar. And there's still a big corporate memory of all that language. And, my generation, I can still preside at a Book of Common Prayer communion service without a book. I was brought up in it. I know it so well. So it's a strange thing. So I think it's very, very different what people are looking for. There was one thing that would make it easy, because we could do a focus group or whatever you do and find out. But actually, people want very different things. We're finding a lot of young people in our church schools are very, very interested in environment. That absolutely speaks to the present generation, living slightly more simply. So there's a number of places, but it seems to me that the task as we're coming out of lockdown slowly, and it'll probably stutter, and we may have small future lockdowns in local areas, I don't know, is precisely this question about trying to contact people in our communities and to listen, as you've hinted, to talk about where there are common agendas, about what we want to do and what we can give. I was preaching recently and saying, I think it's very interesting that you turn the television on and so many channels have got celebs, and you get these, beautiful young people in Love Island or something, and they're all manicured, and it's all, it's not all image, but it's very strong. And yet the iconic image of the last year has been NHS staff in their scrubs. When you think about what's been the story that's told again and again and again, is harassed, tired NHS staff who've had to work extra shifts, who actually, haven't got their makeup on. They've just been so focused out on other people. And I think it's a really interesting commentary on our society today. And that, I think, has broken through. It's interesting, there are more people applying for nursing than ever before in the last 3 months. And that tells me something about some pretty deep stuff in people's hearts and minds, and about the things that really matter. And my hope is that this pandemic is helping us, in the midst of all the pain, ask the question, what really matters? Sorry, that's a terribly waffly, I'm just skirting round your very good question, but you hear my sort of thinking.
I'm looking at the time, and we have time for one final quick question, because I'd hate the Leader of the House of Lords to blame Hertfordshire for any delay in the due process of legislation. So, Richard Beasley, Vice Lord Lieutenant, you're bringing up the rear, so to speak.
Bishop, I guess this is a question really almost in the same vein. Is there any evidence that people's faith across the country having been shaken by what might be characterized in some quarters as being the visitation of the first plague for a century on the community?
I don't know how to answer that. Well, sorry, if you ask, is there evidence? No, I'm not aware of it. There's been a lot of questionnaires, a lot of people listening around. We've been trying in our schools and our congregations as a senior staff to pick up what's coming up from grassroots. There'll be individuals for whom this whole pandemic is for them confirming the fact that the most important thing in life is science. There are other people for whom actually it's questioned their mortality, and there's a whole lot of questions science, as fantastic as it is, doesn't and can't answer. Of course, I want to combine both of those things, which is why I appointed an honorary canon scientist to lecture in our cathedral, to bring these important areas together. And I want to be a church that is unashamedly embracing all that we're learning about the world. We always were in the previous centuries. It's just some subgroups in the church of mainly other churches have gone rather fundamentalist. So I don't know there's any evidence, and I think time will tell. My take on it is where there's been really good local involvement from churches and Christians, just practical stuff that's often not talked about, is that has been seen and noted and has been attractive. Yeah. And there are some magnificent people of goodwill who are just getting on with it. And one of the things I love about my job is I often find myself working with people who are quite cheerfully saying they're humanists or they're something else, but just say, isn't it great to work together on this? And I always say, always good to work together. And I think we can find new things to focus on. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question. I wish we had more data.
Thank you.
Alan, Bishop Allen, it's 14:24 and a half. We said we'd let you go by 14:25. So if everybody else wants to stay on, Alan, we thank you so much for sparing so much of your valuable time. I think it's been a fascinating discussion. I'm sure we could probably go on for most of the afternoon. I, for one, and I'm sure I speak for everybody, just can't wait to get back together and we can shake hands, sit in the cathedral, have a cup of tea or whatever. So hopefully that is not too far away, and we very much look forward to being able to see you in person. But again, thank you very much indeed for sparing your time, and please go and sort out whatever you have to sort out in the House of Lords for us.
Thank you too. Thank you. I'm sorry, there's so many people there. I can see Ian and Stelio and people I haven't spoken to yet. I'm so sorry, but Thank you for what you're doing. If there's anything we can engage with together, don't hesitate, please, to get in touch. And every blessing to you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And if everybody else just wants to stay, we'll advertise our next speaker, who will be His Honour Judge Michael Kay, who is the senior presiding judge in Hertfordshire, who will be joining us. And Siobhan may correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's the 14th of April, isn't it, Siobhan? Well, I think you'll get the information. So Michael Kay, His Honour.
Sounds right.
Yes, 14th. His Honour Judge Michael Kay will be joining us for the next one, and then thereafter we will hopefully get one of the senior military personnel from Northwood Base to come and talk to us. So I hope, firstly, it's great to see so many people, particularly friends from the supplemental list. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully you will continue to do so. But I hope we're finding these presentations interesting. I think it's very informative to hear what's going on from the senior leaders around the council and around the county, and we will keep going with them. And if anybody has any suggestions after the military person, please put them forward, and we'd be delighted to invite them. I don't know if anybody else wants to discuss anything else, but I think we had a good hour with the bishop, so I think it was a very useful time. So thank you all very much. And see you all soon, and keep well.
Thank you, Robert. That's great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Robert, thank you, everyone. Nice to see you all.
And you too. Bye.
Thank you, Robert.
Bye.
Bye.